Welcome everybody to this Sunday panel. I'm glad you're all here. This is an amazing panel. I'm really excited to be here with these folks. This is Books As Flint, using graphic novels to spark political activism. And we're going to be talking all about political activism and comics and the connection and the crossover in the industry. And you're bound for a really good discussion with these guys. I am part of the Comics Education Outreach, which is a branch of Pop Culture Classroom, who kind of runs Denver Comic-Con, as you know. The Comics Education Outreach is a group of teachers that came together. Most of us are from Chicago, but we have some representation all over the country. And our goal is just to get comics into classrooms and help teachers with those comics. That's it. Nonprofit, completely nonprofit. One of the things we're going to start doing in the fall, I just wanted to tell you about it, is we've bought 100 copies of 6 different socially conscious graphic novels, and we're going to be lending them to schools in need with complete lesson plans and study guides. And they're going to borrow them for 4 weeks. When they're done, they're going to send them back to us, and we're going to get them out right to another school. Because as we were going to all these cons, one of the questions I kept getting asked is, what if my school can't afford the books? And I am lucky enough to work in a district that's very supportive and has a little bit of money, so I haven't had that problem. But I felt for those people, and I was like, we need to help these teachers get books into their room. So that's the initiative that we started. So if you're interested in kind of helping out with that or finding out more about it, just see me after the panel. Thank you. Once again, these are our amazing panelists. I will talk first, and I'll let these guys introduce themselves. I am Eric Kallenborn. I teach on the south side of Chicago. I've been a teacher for about 14 years now. I've taught every level of high school, and I've taught graphic novels with every level at the high school level. I have a graphic novel elective that I teach at my high school. It's a senior elective. So I teach it to usually get about 3 sections a year, so about 90 kids. And I teach film and lit too. That's a little bit more popular. I think half the senior class signs up for film and lit because they just want to watch movies. And it's a lot of fun. I teach a lot of socially conscious graphic novels, and I don't shy away from difficult conversations in my classroom. This past semester has been a really rough one to kind of make sure that, we're not saying anything to bother each other in our classrooms, although sometimes it does get difficult. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Todd.
Hello everyone, my name is Todd Emko. I am a conservationist from New York City, and I made a graphic novel about my 3-legged dog, and I just don't understand why not everyone does this with their dog. But my book is called A Piggy's Tale, and we actually have an organization called Darwin Animal Doctors that I started with my co-founder to bring veterinary care and free humane education to regions of the world that don't have access to these things, especially good education, which is really rare in a lot of parts of the world. And we actually now teach this through a whole series of teachers who created humane curriculums around this as humane education all over the US too. And then, so what we expected as happening with the first couple of years with it is that we're taught in a lot of schools and hospitals for special needs kids. And it's used to help teach kids being different is okay. My dog is from the Dominican Republic, so like being from far away is okay, etc. What we didn't expect was that a lot of schools started using it as well as political activism. So for instance, we actually started teaching this in Sumatra, in Indonesia, which is a culture that actually eats dogs and thinks as pigs as like a very dirty animal, according to their culture. And so the schools there actually were teaching it subversively to teach the kids of the next generation to be more open-minded and compassionate than their previous generations. And it caused an uproar in some of these communities where the elders were saying, like, why are you teaching our kids to respect dogs and stuff, and secretly, you're the reason why we're teaching them. But so it's actually being used that way. We actually had a meeting with the mayor's office of New York City recently where they were asking us to create a program around this to use his graphic novel as a way that we can bring more vegan options to schools or get more kids to eat more healthy vegan food as opposed to very unhealthy, like non-vegan school food. And of course, that's a very politically charged conversation, so there's going to be a lot of talks about it before it's implemented, probably in 2018 with the mayor's office. But the fact that people are willing to take that step with something that seems very innocuous as a graphic novel to use as political activism for different reasons around the country tells us a lot about what where people are at right now and what steps they're willing to take and use these for in order to basically get their community to a better place than they think they currently are.
Thanks, Todd. Quinn?
Coming after that, I feel like I'm a teacher. I'm a history teacher in Salt Lake City, Utah. I use graphic novels with students a lot. I've been a political cartoonist, and I really believe in the power of comics as a medium to deliver a personal message that makes something that feels like a big story, like the needs for political activism, very intimate. So kids really connect to those stories better than they do through a news story or something. So, yeah.
Thanks, Quinn. Alan?
Hello. I just had you guys say hello back to me. Hello. So I'm Alan Brooks. I write a comic book called The Burning Metronome. It's sort of a cross between The Twilight Zone and The Usual Suspects. Part of why it interested me to write something based on The Twilight Zone is because The Twilight Zone is always very socially active. Rod Serling especially, like even in his speeches, he's like advocating for civil rights and writing stories against sexism, war, and all that kind of stuff. So the first chapter of The Burning Metronome we put out just by itself, and we dealt with police brutality in that issue. And people have been actually very engaged about it. I try to be pretty balanced. Like I talked to a few police officers about their perspective before I wrote it. And so like locally, like 9 News interviewed me, Denver Post, Westward, 5280, you know, places where you report where news words, where you report words. It's very day of the con, kind of so yeah, it's really cool. Then here we premiered our hardcover, which is 6 chapters. I'm at table G01. Like go one. I want that to stay in your mind. You don't have to come, but it's gonna stay in your mind. Go one. Anyway, so yeah, I've just been. I feel like sci-fi and fantasy in its highest form, including comics and everything like that, is a way for us to view ourselves from a different context. So one of Rod Serling's quotes about the Twilight Zone is, he's like, I can have Martians say things that I couldn't have Democrats and Republicans say. You know, so when you put out a different context, people kind of see it a little differently, and hopefully come to some new understanding about it. And that's kind of how I try to use that art.
Thank you. I have some pretty tough questions today, so I hope being Saturday in the con, or Sunday, I mean leaving on Monday, being Sunday in the con, we're not going to be like, these aren't going to blow our minds a little bit too much. So that's how it's going to go. We're going to pose some amazing questions to these panelists, and then we're going to have I'm going to keep some time for some questions from you guys afterwards, because hopefully as they're talking, your minds are going to get sparked with some amazing ideas that you want to share, ask these guys about, and then we'll get to some Q&A. So question number 1 that I have up here is, why is the graphic novel comics medium important in the quest for social change? Why is this medium important for us making social change?
Sorry. You again, go ahead.
Well, actually, one of the most important ways is what you were actually just talking about just now, is that representing things in a graphic novel makes a lot of really hard topics palatable, if not for adults, especially for children in the classroom. Like, you know, really hard things happen to animals. You know, there's a 3-legged dog in this comic, to animals and cartoon characters in this book that represent a lot of hardships that people might have to overcome in real life. That's made palatable because it is represented in cartoon form. And a lot of these things would not be palatable in the classroom to teach if you're just showing real life what's happening to people out there. And in fact, this started off with Mouse. Remember Mouse, the graphic novel? That's how a lot of places still, a lot of the schools that I'm visiting are still teaching about the Holocaust in schools to little kids. It's a way that you can make it palatable, and they can learn in the context of a social story about like what's happening to real people, what happened to real people that they'll take away from without being as traumatized if they're just seeing just shocking footage all the time. In addition to Twilight Zone, another thing that I really loved growing up was Star Trek, actually. Yeah. It was the only place, actually, that I ever saw a Asian character, and as a good guy in a position of power, actually played by an Asian person.
Also had the first interracial kiss on television.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, they actually had the first gay kiss that was written into the plot that was pulled by the networks before it was allowed to play, because they found out about it and they actually pulled that. That was actually going to be the first place that it was going to happen. And in fact, I grew up and I became a navigator on a ship trying to save the world, actually, a conservation ship. And someone pointed that out to me, and I was like, oh, I totally didn't realize I did that.
Oops. So my oldest friend was actually back there in the corner. We would go to comic book conventions when we were kids, and yeah, we were the only. He was the only person I knew who liked comics. That shows how much things have changed, right? So this is the point that I steal from him. So just act like I thought of it. Basically, comics are distinct in the engagement from the reader. So like movies, television, they're passive, right? Like they just play, you don't really control the speed of them. Books, you're engaged, but you're doing sort of all of the imagining. With comics, there's things that artists and writers can do to sort of speed up or slow down, like encourage you to read in certain ways, but you create the experience as the reader. So it's basically, we've all agreed that we're working together, you know, like as writer, as artist, as reader. And so I think the benefit of that as a teaching tool is if a reader has to engage in that way with the subject matter that you bring, I think it creates a stronger investment in subject matter, you know, and it allows you to reach those people in a different way that other mediums might not.
Well, and with social justice in particular, what you're asking someone to do is take themselves out of their own lives, put them into somebody else's lives, and go through their experience. And with graphic novels, I think with what you were saying, it's the pairing of the images and the text, it gets the students to that place in a faster way than they would with a traditional prose text, maybe even faster than they would by watching a filmed interview with somebody, because you get taken into their world. And so reading March, you are there with John Lewis, you're there going through those same experiences, and with a lot of graphic novels kind of play with things like time going back and forth more than a traditional novel does. And so with John Lewis, you know, you're with him with the chickens on the farm, then you're back in his office as a representative, then you're, you know, with Martin Luther King, you're moving around in time more than you would in most movies, more than you would in most prose texts. But because of the support you have from the images with the text, you can make those transitions and make those jumps without losing the reader. And I think that, as far as format goes, that's one of the real values for me as a teacher.
I will say that last summer, I went to Memphis for the first time, and if any of you who haven't been to Memphis, you should go. It's a really cool city, lots of good food, but the National Civil Rights Museum is there, and it's like right on the spot where Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. They've preserved the front of the hotel, and the museum is inside what used to be the hotel. And it's, I mean, I walking through there and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know any of this stuff. And I realized how much like my schools just failed me in teaching me about the civil rights. So one of the things I wanted to do was like increase the amount of things my students knew. So I bought a class set of March from my school district, and we read it in like, I think almost all my classes. And I thought it was like so much more like just reachable to them than if I was like, hey, I got this really big book on the history of the civil rights movement. And I know this isn't the entirety of the civil rights movement, but it got them thinking about things that they hadn't thought about before. And in a way quicker, more engaging way than if I had, like I said, I think a class set of a bigger novel. This is an interesting question. I'm interested to get your guys' take on this, especially as artists up here too. Can activism manifest as art? And if so, where do we see it? How does it work?
I think that it does, actually, a lot. I mean, I live right next to Harlem in New York City, and a lot of the aspirations that, like, you know, kids and communities have there is written all over the murals on the walls there. And that's how a lot of activists can express themselves safely. And in fact, it is, like we were saying earlier, a palatable way to express something that needs to be communicated. If you have, for instance, a real person's story, that might not be as easy for a kid to relate to or take than if you abstract it in the form of an art or an avatar of some sort. Actually, for instance, one of the ways in which we use art here to try to inspire a lot of the Latin American communities that we work with is that the human main character in this is actually Latin American, and everyone here becomes a superhero and stuff, and we teach it in a lot of communities where the kids, a lot of them have the assumption that when they grow up they're just going to be low-income dishwashers working for the tourist communities where all of the wealthy expats will get all the money and everything. And so when we teach them this, they say, no, you can become anything you want. You can become a superhero. You can become a veterinarian. We'll train you for free or something. And they actually say, oh, okay, you know, like this abstracted form will inspire me. And a lot of those kids then form their own humane education groups on how they're going to become like veterinarians and encourage other kids to become like community leaders and stuff like that. And so now in our clinics there, we're starting to train like kids that have started graduating from high school and stuff and are now like living in our volunteer housing part of the year and just learning to become veterinarians and medical professionals.
You know, after the last election, I really thought about, is it silly to be writing comic books when I need to be out in the streets protesting and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I spent a few weeks really like searching my soul about all that. I realized in every social movement in history, art has always played a prime part in inspiring people and opening up perspectives and sort of giving the protesters the fuel to do the things they need to do. So the conclusion that I came to was that as an artist, this is the tool that I have, and I'm going to use it to inspire people as best I can. I kind of felt it would be irresponsible of me at this point to create something that didn't have any kind of social commentary, you know, because things are bad for some people, you know. And so the answer for me after all that soul searching is yes, this is my form of activism, it's my art.
Well, and I think that if you look at the history of activism, I mean, you have the jungle, you know, from almost 100 years ago. You have the music of the Vietnam era. You have Norman Rockwell's painting of Ruby Bridges. These are kinds of art that have persisted, works of art that say more about those movements than reading a whole book about them might. And so I agree with you. I mean, my kind of art is that I write, and people have noticed that my writing over the last year has sort of turned a corner and become more pointed about certain things. And some people are like, oh, well, we liked it more when you were writing about thunder stuff. I like my country more. So I think that there's a lot to that, and I do try to balance that and be fair with it. But I also think that you're right. Well, whatever your form of art is, you need to be honest with yourself and look at the world around you.
Thanks, guys. What are some of the best examples you have seen of comics being used as social change? So besides, you know, the books that you are encapsulated in on the daily, or do you have any like really good examples of comics you've seen used for social change?
I was thinking about Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams run on Green Arrow, Green Lantern, where the whole idea, this is from the 70s, the whole idea is that Green Arrow was the hero on the ground, Green Lantern was doing all this galactic stuff and was oblivious to what was going on just in the neighborhoods on Earth. So they went on like this road trip, and Green Lantern was like, what, people are addicted to heroin? And you know, like all this kind of stuff. That was really strong because they got to touch on a lot of social issues, and it really resonated with people. And it was a time that comics were still sort of considered, juvenile. So they got a lot of press for dealing with all those really serious issues. That's the first one that came to me.
Actually, so I might be cheating a little bit, but our actual illustrator and co-writer Ethan Young from Dark Horse Comics actually wrote. He actually won the Reuben Award this past year for Best Graphic Novels of the Year for his work, making the graphic novel Nanjing the Burning City. Based on, he actually wrote about the Nanjing massacre in China in World War II by the Japanese. And it was a project that he had been working on ever since high school in order to help himself understand his parents and his relationship with them and why they were the way they were. When it came to topics about where he came from and everything like that. And it was basically just his thing just to get his own demons out and to get his own resolution with his family. But when he put it out there, it got a lot of coverage all over the US, and in fact it was almost immediately distributed in China. Japan actually started ramping up its policies of denying this happened, and almost actually threatening UNESCO with not telling people more about it and everything. And through an interesting story with amazing visuals, he was able to bring news of something that really shaped literally an entire half of the world to the Western world, which mostly just put it as a footnote in most Western history books. And so he's been asked to give talks all over. He's been asked to give talks in China. He's been propped up for something that he didn't even intend to be an act of activism, but is now doing a lot more than he ever could have imagined that it would have done. And just by telling his story.
I think one of the best recent ones I've seen is last year after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. A bunch of comic creators from DC and Marvel and Image and some others put together a Love is Love anthology. And it's just 1- and 2-page stories, some of which are from the creators, some of which are sort of biographies of some of the victims from the nightclub shooting. The proceeds all went to the foundation to help educate people about LGBT issues. Really, I think there's been a lot of, in the last 10 years, I would say that gay and lesbian issues and comics have done a lot to explore those ideas, and some of it in a very, elementary school, very safe, very not sex, love kind of way, and then some of it in superhero world, some of it not in superhero world. But there's been a lot of LGBT progress in comics.
I'm
Two more.
Yeah. No, please, let's keep them coming.
Yeah, right. I was thinking about so I feel like with any ism, racism, classism, sexism, etc., it's either a failure to or a refusal to see the other person's humanity, right? So people who are refusing, they just don't want to reach them. The people who fail to, these mediums can reach them. And so, in the vein of illustrating the humanity of people, there's a book, and I can't remember the author. It's called The Story of My Tits. It's a woman author. She's talking about her life. And, when I first picked it up, I was like, this is 200 pages of her tits. But it's really good. She seems to think her breasts punctuate significant points in her life, developing them, changed how men interact with her. And she became a mother, and her mother developed breast cancer, just different stuff like that. And so it's always different points in her life. And so there would be a very human story, and that's a form of activism because you're able to see what her experience was. Also, Kyle Baker, who is just a comics great, did a Nat Turner book. And that was really moving. So that's when I think it's just called Nat Turner. It might have a colon subtitle. Yeah, Nat Turner. Yeah, so that's a good one to check out.
If we're doing another round,
By all means.
my psychology teachers in my school district asked me to look for some books for them that were about mental illness, and there have been a few. One's called Marvels, and it was about it's a memoir about the author's experience with bipolar disorder, and being from a family that has its fair share of mental illness plus some. It's a topic I thought about a lot, but seeing how she's both the author and artist, expressed her inner world with images and with words, and sometimes the chaos series of events ends up a patient in that same hospital. And so you see 11 different kinds of mental illness, either from the viewpoint of a caregiver or the patient. And both of those are really, I think mental illness is something we don't talk about a lot. Or sometimes we talk about too much with the wrong people. But I think both of those really gave me some insights into those issues.
And now somebody had briefly mentioned the superhero books, how they're kind of touching on a lot of these issues too. And I know a couple of my favorite books. I don't read a lot of hero books monthly, but the two I do read is the Miles Morales Spider-Man and Miss Marvel. Like I love Miss Marvel, and I just think like there's one issue, there's one point in both of those runs in the past year that's stick in my head. One of them was from Miss Marvel, and it was an issue where she was trying to get her community members to go vote, and they didn't know how to vote. And like 4 pages of the issue, I might be exaggerating, it might be like 2 or 3, was dedicated to like literally teaching the reader how to register to go vote. And I'm like, this is great. So people who didn't know, they knew the website, knew how to do it, knew like, well, if you don't know this, here's the website you go to get this. And I'm like, this is fantastic. And it was after the election. But, you know, but at that point, like, sure, like, let's just get more people voting next time. You know, everybody, we need more voter turnout in this country. And I think, you know, that was awesome to see that on that page. And then there was this Miles Morales issue. And I brought this up last year at C2E2, and it was just such an interesting moment where he was having a conversation with somebody, and the person had found out that he was a person of color because his mask had ripped. And they're like, it's so cool, you're like the Black Spider-Man. And he's like, I don't want to be the Black Spider-Man. I just want to be Spider-Man. And that, I remember that panel right there. I was like, damn. So I went to the panel I went to. It was a panel like this, and I asked the question. We engaged in a really good discussion about what does that mean, and it ended up turning into this whole debate about, you know, was Barack Obama the first African American president, or should he just be the president? And it was like really interesting debate there. That this like one panel in this comic strip, and I was like, when I asked that question about that Miles Morales comic, there were like 5 people who were like, yeah, that's a really interesting thing. And it was a really cool thing that these comics are kind of like bringing those things out of their readers. Which brings me to my next question here, which is, what is the industry doing to make sure that comics and graphic novels are a catalyst for change, and should and can they be doing more?
Well, I know Marvel's making, sort of bold moves towards being, replacing a lot of the established superheroes with people of color or women heroes. I know this, backlash that there's been an effort. I also noticed that they made efforts to have the writer and artist also match the race or gender of the characters. So that's been really interesting. Image has been really good in terms of inclusivity. Valiant has really set a diverse, I'm doing all the superhero companies. And I feel like independence have always, independent comics, always really sort of been the cutting edge of that. There was a period when independent comics were just kind of like white guy angst, It's like, okay, well, what's my shoe? It's cool to see how it's all kind of grown and improved, but I'm really pretty optimistic about how things are going, and I think, I guess I feel like those corporations are just interested in how much money they get out of it, but people are buying it, they're responding about what's happening, so big.
Yeah, I do. DC has made some similar moves with trying to bring more diversity in ways that make sense and still feels true to the characters. But they also have done some things like Jean Gwen Yang is writing a Superman book now that is an Asian Superman, which is a really good story, a really good read. So I think that the publishers, on the one hand, just want more money. On the other hand, they're getting enough backlash from people like some of you and some of me and some of Twitter that when they make these gross missteps, it's like, what the hell are you thinking?
Yeah.
Then with things like Twitter, if they want to get feedback, they can get feedback. If they want to listen to it, they can listen to it. I think with schools, especially, seeing characters like Miles Morales, seeing characters like Miss Marvel, seeing the popularity of those, is I think the companies are seeing those messages. If you look at this is the superheroes, all the DC Comics TV shows on the CW, all those have people of color in roles that used to be whiter than me. You know, they all have gay and lesbian characters in it. So kids are fine with all this. It's people that are my age and up who are the ones who are holding things back. And so I think that as the industry changes, as they start to see, okay, kids are fine with this, then hopefully they'll be more open to change.
Like you were saying, the industry has been more open to doing more and including more, but it's always been a reaction so far. Like when Marvel and DC started tweeting images saying, hey, check out our annual writers meeting, check out it, and people had this big backlash. It's like, okay, there's not a single woman in here, there's not a single person of color, where are they, and everything. And so that forced them to do it. I think a lot more, the more independent producers have been more open to just putting stuff out there that's really risky. On the topic of non-superhero stuff, I don't think I'm getting the name right, but have you guys read Kaiju Prison? I think it's, do you know what it's called? Kaiju Max, yes. So this came out last year, I think, in reaction to everything going on. It is a comic about kaiju, giant monsters, like giant monsters, in a private prison. And it goes over all the problems of a private prison, like these giant monsters have poor health care. It's overcrowded. They're the ones that are marginalized are in there longer and stuff. It's crazy how much they're pushing it in getting this stuff out there in the form of like a children's comic and stuff. I mean, there are warnings that the publisher and label put on there. It's like, warning, your kid might not understand some of the issues in this and stuff like that. It might not be for your kid and stuff. But they are taking the chance and saying, well, hey, now we got really nothing to lose. We might as well put everything out there. And I think that's going to start putting a lot more people in a place where they're saying, like, well, maybe if that's out there, maybe I can do something like that too.
Sure, and I think we'd be remiss to not mention Bitch Planet. Speaking of prisons, I'm sure how many of you have read Bitch Planet? Extremely popular comic out there right now. Basically, there's a planet to prison women who are non-compliant. And it's like and then a lot of it happens that goes from there. It's
It's written by a woman.
Yep, it's an amazing book, so check that out. I would not put it in your classroom without reading that first. And plus, a lot of this, please just caveat, make sure you're not just putting random stuff, oh, I heard this is a good book, and leave it in your classroom library. Read it first. Make sure you know what's in it. All right, this is an interesting question. I'm interested to hear what the panel has to say about this one, and I'm sure we all have some opinions on this question too. Is activism trendy? And how does this affect what you do in your quest for transformative conversations? So once again, I'll let that sink in. Is activism trendy? And how does this affect what we do in our quest for having those quality conversations?
For me, I guess it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's trendy, because the things that are important to me are important to me. So the only way that it might affect what I do is more people might be engaged by it, because the school would be engaged by it. But I think so I've always sort of failed at fitting in. When I was in 4th grade, everybody was buying suede Pumas, and I asked my mother to buy me Pumas because I didn't know what suede was. I got the regular Pumas, and I wasn't cool. That's kind of how that happened. Yeah, and everyone said, oh, those are just regular Pumas. So that's been every time in my life I've tried to conform. So as an adult, I'm not usually aware of it. And I think that was good for me, because it means that the things that are important to me, I'm going to continue to fight for, whether they kind of come in or out. And so I think it only might affect the amount of reaction or press I get for the things that I do within activism. So that's for me.
Definitely the answer, it doesn't matter, is very, very true. But the answer is also yes, activism can be very trendy, and the way it could negatively impact things is when everyone just comes out of the woodworks and says, I'm an ally, and I'm a really good ally, and here's why. activist groups has destroyed so many really, really potentially good causes that have come out and everything. And it has often silenced the people who really need to be heard in a lot of these causes. And again, some of the only way, like I've met like the writer of Afrocentrism, who, saying like, hey, this is the way that they can get their work out, this is the way that they can get their stories out, in the face of a lot of people saying like, oh, well, it's got to be me giving this talk in the school and everything. It's got to be me giving this talk at this big rally or this big, at this big march or something like that. I've got something to say. And it's kind of clouded a lot of the actual message that needs to get out there by people who, have already not been heard and are now being, stepped on by people who say, okay, well, I'm going to tell everyone how important your cause is. So just step back here and let me do my thing and stuff. And so yeah, it does negatively impact things, but again, you're right, it doesn't matter. We still have to keep on speaking about the things that we want to get our message out on. And that's the only way it's eventually going to be heard.
I was going to say to that point about allies, there was a tweet from, I cannot remember her name, I don't remember her real names, but she's a professor, she's Muslim, and the tweet was, you don't have to be a voice for the voices, just pass the mic, which I thought was really powerful. And that made her remind me that I should make sure I
Yeah. Actually, my co-writer here, Ethan Young, he's Chinese American and everything, but he's very careful when we're going out and saying like it's very, a lot of people are going to ask us to speak and everything like that. But you got to remember, we're not people of color. We're people of hue. We're not even people of color in the spectrum of things like that. So if we're given the opportunity to speak, we have to pass it because we're going to get very tempted to take the mic when people offer it. But it's often not our place to talk about things that we might not really have as much knowledge on as someone else is doing it.
Well, I think trendy is important, but I think it might be more that activism is kind of time sensitive, that there are times for activism in certain things, and I think that as in education world, I don't know, that Ferguson is going to blow up the week before it blows up. And so I think as teachers, it behooves us to sort of capitalize on these things as they happen, and to be as well informed as possible. I think knowing things like graphic novels that are out there, knowing things that are things that can support our students and support our efforts, that to me as an educator is the important part, is being ready to pull out a comparison to the triangle shirtwaist fire, or to be able to pull out, to know what resources are out there for me and my students. Because honestly, in education world, it kind of doesn't matter if something is trendy or not. I'm still going to do it because that's what's best for my kids. And if I'm teaching 12 and 13-year-olds, I'm going to be their only teacher. I have them for 45 minutes that day. Their math teacher is going to talk about it, their science teacher isn't going to, their PE teacher isn't going to, their parents probably aren't going to. If I'm their access point for this really important thing, I'm going to take advantage of it.
Todd came to my classroom, not this past April, but the year before, to talk about his experiences and to talk about Piggy in my graphic novel class. And Todd was on Whale Wars. And many of you guys may probably have seen that show, and at that time, a lot of my kids had seen it. And he was talking about these amazing things that they were doing with these animals, and my kids were like, he was on Whale Wars. That was like the thing they were latching onto. And because that was real trendy to them at the time. And they were asking questions about that, but then afterwards we were able to have these transformative questions like, yeah, that guy was on Whale Wars, and there's all these other things, and they were really interested. And I think, wasn't it last year, a couple of my kids volunteered to help out at the booth at the con too, which was super cool. So sometimes that if you catch people at their peak of trendy activism, you can kind of rope them into we was at a panel at the Chicago Alternative Comics Festival, and this was a panel. This was one of the questions I asked. I asked if I could steal it, and one of the women said, yeah, it's great that it's trendy too, because then you get extra bodies to do work for you. When we have a real cause and those trendy people show up, we're like, great, I really need a big I need to move these boxes, I need a big coffee. We'll take advantage before the next big thing comes, and they're just off to that. And it was like a backhanded compliment in a way, but it's like if bodies are there to help at that time, we got to take advantage of that when we can, and hope that more people then show up to do the rest of the work. This is a question I'm just going to open up to you guys here, and it's kind of like, what did I miss? Coming into this panel, was there something that you were hoping to talk about or wanted to talk about that that the questions didn't ask you today? Is there anything you want to say about activism before we open it up for a couple questions?
I wanted to say that I forgot to tell you that our booth is number 622, Station Lift.
Go one.
Yeah, as I said, you guys remember Go One?
Go one.
I don't have a booth, but you can buy my book at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's Play Like a Pirate, Engage Students with Toys, Games, and Comics. It's super good. But that's kind of a joke, but it's real. When I got asked about this panel, one of the first things I thought of is the role of webcomics and how they are able to do things in a more timely manner for a lot of social activism than you're going to get from any publisher. So some good resources for that. Book Riot. They have sort of a weekly roundup of the best webcomics on particular subjects. And then the NIB, N-I-B, is the other one that has sort of a weekly roundup of things by topic. And then they have sort of a searchable database. When I found Book Riot, I was looking for a resource to teach about Syria, partially because I didn't know how to explain it to kids, and it was becoming a big thing. And in 11 panels, this webcomic did a better job of explaining Syria than anything I had seen. I've read long articles, I've watched hour-long documentaries, I've done everything. And in 11 panels, this author-artist taught me about Syria. So webcomics are huge for me.
Yeah, so thanks for all of it. I also think hyperbole and a half.
Yes.
Particularly about depression and stuff like that.
We're about 5 minutes. Todd, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, actually, well, on the topic of that, there's actually other non-webcomic outlets like Vox that are now starting to integrate more cartoons to explain like how activism works and how a lot of world issues work in a very, very easy and palatable way. And so it is definitely spreading, yeah.
With about 5 minutes left, I do want to kind of open it up to questions to see if anybody here has a question for our panel. Feel free about things they've said, their works, yeah.
Hi, Joe. I have a question about activism. Do you believe direct action or indirect action is a more effective means? And to what degree do you believe direct action should go, or at what point does direct action trespass upon the unforgivable?
That's a whole panel in and of itself, I would say. But I would, maybe my simple answer is that I think that they work together. Both, because they're typically, it seems like no oppressive regime lets go of their oppression unless they're afraid of the threat of a more violent type of protest. It's not to say violent protest is always the right way, but generally, say civil rights, we get Martin Luther King sent to us in terms of the example, right? But African Americans in this country were peacefully protesting for centuries. But it wasn't until the government or whomever was afraid of the Black Panthers and Malcolm X that they were like, oh, Martin Luther King will take this option. Same thing with during Gandhi's time. There was a violent, I forgot what they were called, there's a violent faction. And again, I don't always approve them because they're the ones who ultimately assassinated Gandhi. But under the threat of that more harsh action, the oppressors took the option of the peaceful.
As a teacher, I legally can only talk about indirect action, so that's the one that I support.
So after the panel will talk.
Sure, yeah. But honestly, that's the one I emphasize with students, and it's partially because that's the safer road as a teacher, but it's also partially because 12-year-olds can be dumb. I don't want them to have a cafeteria protest that burns the building down. So, yeah, usually.
My answer is similar, both are necessary. The direct action will help stop an immediate crime from happening against somebody right now, but the indirect way is the only way to make the social change last over a long time. For for instance, when Eric was talking about whale wars, people got really, either on one side or the other about the fact that we're getting in the way, like, engaging with, Japanese military ships, like to stop like illegal whaling and stuff like that. And yeah, that'll stop that one thing from happening. But the only thing that's going to stop it long term is the humane education and the growing awareness in Japan itself about stopping this practice within the country. Nisavic actually made a film called The Whale Hunt. And it's about kids that were, learning about whaling, and then they get transported and get carried on a whale. And they learn about it. And things like that is going to make a lot more difference in the long run, while direct action is stopping the crime from happening right now. So yeah, both necessary. Yeah.
Those were great answers to that question. Thanks, guys. We got time for, I think, one more right here.
Yeah, Eric, I think it's more for you and Quinn, but I'd love to hear from the other guys as well. How do you balance, because you give the example of March, right? And last year, John Lewis has conformed and fit in as opposed to really challenging systems of authority. For you teaching in Chicago, there are real issues around police brutality and what Rahm Emanuel has done with the schools. How are you all as educators able, and it sort of ties into the activism or direct action or passive, but to really weave them so that it's not palatable when it's historical, but how do you all in your classrooms balance them?
You want to go first on this? That's a deep question. It's hard. It's hard. You're talking about the balance there, right? Like a lot of the balance that happens. Like, I just want to tell a quick story. There is this girl in my class who, the kids know that. I mean, I'm not out. We're talking about politics in my class, but they know that I was relatively liberal. The day after the election, a girl comes up to my desk to turn in a paper, and she puts it down on the desk in front of me and whispers in a really kind of like scary voice, "Hillary's going to jail," and then smiles and goes back to her desk. And the day after the election, I was like, like a lot of people in my school, like teachers were crying in the library. I mean, it was rough. It was rough at my school. And it was rough for me too. And like, what do you do at that moment, right? And as a teacher, just take it. And I said, well, we'll see. I mean, that was my reaction. I physically said, well, we'll see. And I was like, who knows? But in my head, I was like, I can't believe that just happened to me. And and that also kind of the balance between the direct action and indirect action. And I made that decision right there that I'm going to do my best to be the best person in this classroom I can possibly be, to let this girl know that I'm not her enemy. And there are times like that, like maybe earlier in my career I'd been like, oh, I'm gonna get this girl back, but no, I said there's no reason for that. As a teacher, like I've come to the point in my career where I can just like accept that and say, all right, what can I do to kind of, and maybe that kind of like that idea of trying to take every response to every action in a way that's let these kids know that I care about them, and that no matter what happens, no matter what our differences are, I'm going to find a common ground with them to make our relationship work. And I think a lot more teachers need to, I mean, my teachers are doing that. Teachers do that. But I think if teachers come at a lot of these situations with that mindset, I think a lot of problems will be alleviated quickly. We had a couple issues in our department. I'll let Quinn answer. I'll just say we had a lot of issues this year with kids not standing for the pledge and teachers like getting on them. And I'm like, just let it go. Like, why you doing? And they're like, but they're like, and I'm like, okay. It's like that debate, like that whole thing sparked this past year, and that's been just a crazy debate too in our district and districts across Illinois. But it was in the papers, like, monthly. Quinn, I'm sorry.
No, I think you said it well. I think if your students need to know that you love them and you want what's best for them. When it comes to activism, my message with them is be effectively activist. So don't be like a click, oh, I liked this on Facebook, so I've done my part. Do something that matters. And wherever you are on that political spectrum, know what you love and do what matters.
So one of the main tenets of our humane education curriculum is basically not teaching one side or the other, but giving the kids the ability to think critically about anything that they give it as a strong stance, and letting them come to the conclusion themselves. One of the last projects that we do with them after these activities is they make their own social justice comics. And so a lot of these kids on their own, that wouldn't have done it before the programs, ended up making, they're like 10 to 12-year-old kids making comics about marriage equality. saying that's really necessary. Like this one little 10-year-old kid stood up and said, well, I'm going to make mine about, did you know that women don't get paid as much as men? Like, people need to hear about this, and this is terrible. I'm going to make a comic so people know about it and stuff like that. And so, that's all you can do is basically try to lead them to whatever conclusion they can have with the best resources that they could have to make their own decision.
We have a couple extra minutes, actually. If anybody has another question, we'd be happy to field another one. I feel this is going really well. Anybody else have anything they want to ask the panel? Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so we teach a global studies course at Aurora. So we have a very high Hispanic population and a huge refugee population. And so we try to do like take action pieces or PBL projects. What is your favorite, like, when you incorporate current events and activism, what's your favorite type of project and a take action piece other than here's my poster?
What grade level? Ninth grade. I can say really quickly that I have this really, I can share it with you too. See me afterwards. We do this like political speech project where the kids, I do years where there wasn't a presidential election. And then I have the kids research like social, political, and economic problems of that time. And then they have to write like an inauguration speech. So we study the rhetoric behind inaugural addresses and stuff like that. And then they write the speech, and there's a speech writer. One of the kids plays the president. They all have their roles. And then we do, like, I go on the stage of the school, we put up the American flags, and they dress in suits, and they actually give their inaugural addresses that they write. And that teaches them about the activism, because you have to take, like, if you're coming into the presidency in a year where there's stuff going on in the country, so they have to consider the things that are going on and how they would talk to the American people about tackling those issues without being very intrusive. Those are all actually, it's really kind of, because it's very positive, because inaugural addresses are supposed to be very much like, we're going to do this, and I'm here for you sort of thing. And we look at a lot of like past inaugural addresses as well, if you guys want to.
For us in my school district, so I'm in Salt Lake City, so we don't have any problems. But over the last 5 years or so, we've had a big influx of refugees, especially. And so we have several different refugee centers that are sort of family centers within our district. And so we have encouraged service learning at our schools, either having kids volunteer, doing things like simple, things like food drives, but also like school materials. I mean, what are the things these kids and families need? And sometimes that is like one-on-one tutoring, but we're really trying to get other schools that don't have that particular problem on board with some service learning has been a challenge. And I'll say, like, the administration in our district hasn't been the most supportive. So I'm kind of like you. I'm looking for ways to support these kids and engage them while kind of encouraging other people to help carry it up, because it's a challenge for the teachers, for sure.
One of the things that we like to do, which might be easier in like smaller communities that we work with, but could be scalable, is that we like to have projects where the kids can learn from, populations affected and stuff, where they can open up a dialogue to find out what the issues are and stuff, but then have the kids come up with either cartoons or posters or something to say that these are solutions that we came up with and stuff, and then say that, oh, the winner of it will have, is something that the school or community will do together and stuff. Or one of the things that, like, for instance, we visited a charter school in Brooklyn where the kids had a Shark Tank, basically, out of recycled materials that they found, where they learned about a whole bunch of problems in the community and stuff, and they all came up with inventions that they came up with using recycled materials that they found to solve a problem that they saw in that community and stuff, and just keep them thinking throughout the year about like how they can use the resources that they have to help a community that they are now going to be engaged in and communicate with.
Another resource for refugees is with the webcomics is there was an Australian artist who got stories of I think 100 different children and their refugee stories, and illustrated them each in one-page, really brief cartoons, and where it is an Australian immigration situation and not the United States, it sort of removes some of the political tension. It's different countries, it's a different situation, but it's the same story. They're still moving because of war, because of famine, because of political unrest. But removing the United States and our government from the scenario makes it an easier sell to people who aren't me. But, and that's with that's on the local riot as well on the website.
I'm going to invite you guys up here to talk to us a little bit more. If you have specific questions or want to meet anybody up here, remember our booth numbers. It's Go One 622, 622, and Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Can we give a round of applause for Alan, Todd, and Quinn? I really had a lot of fun up here. Thank you guys for coming and spending time with us today. Come on up and meet us and hang out and have a great rest of your day at the con. Thank you.
Thank you.